Joining us here is the Congresswoman of Iowa, Miller-Meeks. She sits on the Veterans Affairs and Energy and Commerce Committees. Great to see you, Congresswoman. Thank you so much for coming on. So there's a lot to discuss in terms of what the president will be speaking about, the economy. That's going to be key, touting the success that he's seen, but also looking forward. America 250, the November midterms. Talk to us about what you anticipate for tonight.
Well, first and foremost, I do hope he talks about what he's done in reasserting American energy dominance, which is bringing costs down at the gas pump. And given that 60% of food cost is related to energy, that'll translate into reduced cost at the grocery store as well. That he will bring up the working families tax cut. So this is a monumental tax cut for the American people. And remember that every single Democrat voted to raise your taxes. So as people are filing their taxes or getting their refunds, they're either paying less tax or they're getting a larger refund than they have before. And there's tremendous provisions within the working families tax cut, both for small businesses, for farmers, for larger businesses and manufacturing. We just had a large manufacturer, make an announcement. They're building a new facility, which will mean more jobs, more production in Iowa, and it's related to the capital expenditures within the working families tax cut. Also for regular families, so whether it is reducing tax on overtime, reducing tax on tips, lower tax brackets in general, doubling the standard deduction, doubling the child care tax credit, and then also the tax deduction for Social Security benefits. Yeah. So $6,000 tax deduction for individuals, $12,000 for seniors. That's phased out over higher incomes. That's going to be tremendous for our seniors that can go into paying for prescription drugs. So I think, tremendous provisions in there. And then, of course, the baby account. So my daughter, I'm going to be having a grandchild later next month. And so that child will be eligible. What a way to start a family, regardless of their income level, especially lower income levels, off with a savings account. And will, reinvigorate a savings culture. And then I hope he does talk about waste, fraud, and abuse. So we, as an administration, in the working families tax cut, in our appropriation bills, we're reducing waste, fraud, and abuse. And certainly what we've seen in Minnesota emphasizes that we need to talk about that. As we're talking about what we spend money on, what our priorities are, what we're going to use taxpayer money for, it's important that we use that money wisely. Yes. And that we do tackle waste, fraud, and abuse.
Yeah, I think that's true. Americans don't mind paying the taxes if it's going to programs that are really helping themselves and their neighbors and their communities. But it's this waste that you just get so sick of seeing because nobody else seems to think that it's a big deal. Democrats are like, oh, why are you going after them? It's just some poor error in accounting or something. But I'd like to get your thoughts about the folks who say, you know what, I don't like this president, I don't like his policies, I'm not going to go. I'm going to go have a protest someplace. They seem to be in D.C. Less and less as it is, and not getting their jobs done when they are there. And now they're going to skip this?
Well, to your point, so I voted for President Trump all 3 times. So I attended the inauguration ceremonies of President Biden. I attended every single, joint address to Congress, State of the Union that President Biden came. I was respectful. You respect the office of the president regardless of who occupies that office. So I may have disagreed with the policies. I didn't personally attack individuals. But you have your disagreements. That's what elections are for. But you attend, you be respectful. And I certainly have not seen that from both sides of the aisle, but that's my personal philosophy. I think it goes back to what you learned in kindergarten, and that is the golden rule. You treat other people how you want to be treated. So we certainly have done tremendous things that benefit the American people, that certainly benefit Iowans. I'm looking forward to seeing more of that, and I hope the president talks about housing. And as a military veteran, what President Trump has done to make sure veterans have access to care, Secretary Collins looking at, again, waste, fraud, and abuse, the system that doesn't deliver care. So when you're increasing the number of bureaucrats that don't administer care, and that's not going to doctors, nurses, PAs, providers, then, psychologists, psychiatrists, counselors, then that's care that those veterans are not receiving. So as a veteran, and the veterans I talk with are very pleased with what the president has been doing to try to make sure veterans get care as rapidly as possible.
Right.
And
that's a great point. Veterans to get
access.
care, and he's got a lot to talk about tonight. He's talked about the extent of how long the speech will be, the State of the Union address happening tonight, 9 p.m. Congresswoman Mary Miller-Meeks, who will be in attendance. Congresswoman, thank you very much.
Thank you.